Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 192. We are now in the days between Yutas Kislev and Chanukah, where we find a number of letters from the Rebbe and a number of talks related to this period, always connecting the two. Yutas Kislev, of course, being the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, and Chanukah, though preceding Yutas Kislev by many years, but nevertheless also the celebration of light, and specifically the light that comes from Shemin, Zayis, from olive oil, Shemin. Chemin Shepard Data, the oil of Torah, is considered the rosin, the secrets of Torah. Just like an olive, on the surface you only see the olive, and you don't see and experience the oil until you press the olive. The same thing in Torah, on the surface level you see the Torah, the nigla of the Torah, the outside surface level, and the inner dimension of Torah is compared to Chemin Shepard Data. And the Rebbe always makes the connection between the Chemin Shepard Data of Chanukah and the Chemin Shepard Data of Yutas Kislev, which, as the Shalah says, that he compares it when that the holidays have a connection to the Parsha, even though the holidays like Chanukah, he connects the Parsha Vayeshev and Miketz, even though it happened many years later, because the Torah is the blueprint of existence. Istakel baraiso bara alma. When you look in the Torah, God looked in the Torah like an architect looks in the blueprint by which to create. So therefore, even though the events of the Torah happen at a certain time in history, but the spiritual events are perpetual and proceed, and therefore even in Yom Chanukah could be hinted to in the Parsha. The same thing you can say about Yutas Kislev and Chanukah, that even though Chanukah precedes many years, and it wasn't yet the Gili of Chassidus as we know it, nevertheless Chanukah is also the celebration that becomes, in retrospect, we appreciate it more when it comes to Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, that we appreciate the revelation of the Shemin of Torah, and in many ways appreciate what Chanukah really is. To give one example, this is the famous question that's asked: why is Chanukah the mitzvah? My Chanukah, the Gemara asks in Shabbos. What's Chanukah, and why do we celebrate Chanukah why do we commemorate it through the lighting of a menorah? Chanukah, seemingly, as we look at the story and we say the Alanissim, is the miracle of the victory of the many, of the few over the many. That the Maccabees and that challenged the Syrio-Greek Empire that defiled the Beis Hamikdash. There was a war, and they won the battle. Excuse me. As a result of the victory of the battle, they were able to rededicate the Beis Hamikdash and the Mizbeach, Chanukah, which is the reason it's called Chanukah, one of the reasons. Chanukah HaMizbeach, Chanukah HaMikdash, and were able also rededicate the menorah, which was defiled. The oil was defiled by the Syrians, and they were able to find that crucible, one crucible that burned, that could only had the power to burn for 1 day, and it burned for 8 days. But that seems to be a result of the actual victory, which is a victory. Like Purim, we celebrate because it was a victory of a Haman. So why is the celebration seemingly one in detail? There are many things that resulted from the victory over the Syrians during Chanukah, which of course happened as in the Second Temple. So Chassidus answers the following: because the whole miracle of Chanukah, the whole Nitzachon of Chanukah, is a Nitzachon in Eir. What was the victory about? In Purim, as the Levush and others write, Purim, the miracle was in saving Jewish lives. Haman won lahashmid, la'abed, to destroy and annihilate, literally in a Holocaust, all the Jewish bodies, including their souls, no, with Jewish life. Chanukah, the Syrians and the Greeks did not, the Syria Greeks, the Greco-Syrians didn't want to kill Jews. They wanted, as we say in Alanissim, lashkichem teresechem ulavira mechukir etzenecha. As the emphasis put, not just lashkichem teresecha. They had no problem with the philosophy and the concept and the ideals and values of the Torah. But teresecha, why are you connecting it to God, that it's God's Torah, the Kedusha, the seemingly beyond the supra-rational and the supra element to the divine element of Torah. And chukir etzenecha, no problem with mitzvahs as ethical, moral guide, fine. Etzenecha, chukir etzenecha, chukim, which means not just the logical, but the supra-rational. And etzenecha, God's ratzon, why are you adding sanctity to it? So there is where war is against the Eir. The Eir is symbolized by the Neshama, Eir HaNeshama, Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Eir, and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. So their war was against the soul, which is the closest approximation to the soul, is the flame of God. The Teira Secha, the Tzenecha, meaning the divine connection to these elements, the Teira and the mitzvahs. So the war was against Eir. So what was the taken of the war was not just a war. It was a war against the spirituality and against the Eir dimension, the light dimension. So how do you celebrate? That was the core cause. This is explained by the Alter Rebbe and at length in Shari Eira by the Mittler Rebbe, both Balei Geula of Chodesh Kislev, the Alter Rebbe Yud Tes Kislev, the Mittler Rebbe Yud Kislev, and Tes Kislev being the birthday and the yahrzeit of the Mittler Rebbe, as we discussed a few weeks ago. So this is what Chassidus itself illuminates what Chanukah is really about. Could this be understood before Chassidus? There were different explanations. But when you learn Chassidus, which is the Eir and the Shemin of Teira, you understand what the real battle was over the Shemin, and that was the war, was over that inner dimension, the Eir of Teira, which is in general the divine element, but where is it most revealed, the divine element? That's in Primis HaTeira. Because Primis HaTeira talks about the God, the Baruch Hu B'Teira Tchila, not just that Teira gives us laws of Shabbos or Kashrus or other laws of how to serve God, but also the godliness within it. To remember that this is all coming from a divine place, that we're here to transform the world and introduce a divine element, not just Teira as a moral guide, not just Teira Mitzvahs as a moral guide, or Teira as a book of wisdom, but the divine element, the Elokecha, the Teira Secha and the Ritzenecha, the godliness within it. And that's how Chassidus explains the miracle of Chanukah and why we celebrate it, not an incidental thing, but that is the core victory was in the union of Ner Mitzvah V'Teira Eir. So that's an example. How does it relate to us? It relates to us because in our lives as well, we have two parts. Everybody has two components to their life. There's the what and there's the what you do, and there's the why you do it. There's the mechanics of every particular action, and then there are the forces behind the dynamics that are taking place behind the scenes. You can keep Shabbos, but what does it mean to be Shabbos-dik? It means to be connected to the divine, not just to not do certain things and to eat certain things and to pray certain prayers. Same thing with Chanukah. You can light the candles, you can give Chanukah gelt, you can do the customs and rituals, but then there's the pnimius, the Chemin Shepard Data, the oil within it. And oil is understanding the spirituality of the message. That what Chanukah we embrace, not just the miracle that Jews survived, but the miracle why we survive, which is due to our souls. Due to the fact that we're dedicated to a transcendent dimension to our lives, which is represented by Eir. Eir is transcendence. Eir, as Chassidus explains at length, the Mishaal why Eir is used, Eir Ein Sof, not Shefa, because Eir is epitomizes and personifies Bittle. Eir is no essence of its own. All it is reflecting its source. And yet it is a reflection. So Eir is an example, and the Eir of Chanukah is as well, to illuminating and to bringing down a higher presence into this world. So you can do God's mitzvahs, you can learn God's Torah, but not necessarily bringing in a revealed way, a higher dimension. You're doing it by osmosis, meaning by simply doing a mitzvah, you learn Torah, so there's a divine revelation. But when we feel it, and we experience it as divine, when we experience it as something that is otherworldly, or higher than worldly, supra-rational, beyond existence, not just a moral code that any human being can come up with, not just wisdom and philosophy and ideas, which is chachma bagoyim tamin, chachmasm benaschem le'enei kolam. There's a lot of wisdom in Torah, but seeing that it's a divine wisdom, you're seeing that additional element, the transcendent element that's beyond the human. That's the celebration of Chanukah, which of course is the whole essence of Chassidus applying Chassidus to our lives and understanding that we need to have that soulful dimension, especially today. Once upon a time when Jews lived in pure environment, pure olive oil, and there was no being defiled, they were not exposed, they were insulated and immunized from the world around them. So in a way, simply by being in that environment, that fed their souls. But there came a time as the darkness got stronger, when the Arizal started saying mitzvah, and the Arizal said the time has come of mitzvah legala, the time to reveal the Chemin Shepard Data, the oil. And this only accelerated the Baal Shem Tov hearing from Mashiach. Yufutza meinesecha chotza is the key to bringing Mashiach. And the Alter Rebbe, of course, spreading it even further and turning it into Chassidus Chabad, which was vindicated Yutes Kislev, when the Shemin became a method and a legitimate method that's necessary for every person, every Jew to study. This, of course, turned it into a whole Yefutz Menesach Chutza in the broadest sense of the word, that now this is the time that we have to focus on that. There's additional point, as the Rebbe Rashab says in Teira Shalom, that is difficult to say. But the fact is, he says, just like Zayis, Kishiketchenei say, when you press an olive, that's how you produce its oil. The same thing you could say on Rabbeinu HaGadol, on the Alter Rebbe, that he was pressed. Basically, the Meiser, the imprisonment and the oppression that he dealt with, that he had to endure, brought out the deeper oil, which became the Iggeret of Yefutz Menesach Chutza, which became after Yutes Kislev, as the Rebbe Rashab explains. And only again accelerated each generation, subsequent generation, with the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe in our Deira Shvi. And today, this is the primary tool that, coupled obviously with Nigla Data, because you need a body and a soul, you need an inner and an outer, the Chemin Shepard Data, the celebration of Chanukah. And Chanukah also represents that point, as we discussed last week, that the Gili of Chassidus is for two reasons. One, it's a tayameh, a taste of what will come when the Geula comes. And the second, because the darkness became stronger. And what is Chanukah? Darkness. When do you light the menorah? Not in the morning like the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, according to different opinions at different times, but in the morning. You light dafke by night, Chanukah, mishatishka hachama, as the sun is setting. Achatichlas raglu d'hamedoi. Achatichla raglu min hashuk, meaning the end of the day, as the sun sets, and you're dealing with the hostile elements of the world. And where do you light it? Ha-pesach beisim mibachutz, on the door facing outside. The menorah was lit inside the Beis HaMikdash. The menorah was 7 candles, 7 branches. The menorah Chanukah is 8. All this symbolizes that the Chanukah is also to illuminate, and primarily to illuminate the darkness, to illuminate the end of the day, to illuminate the difficult parts of life. And b'chutz, the chutzah. So the Pesach Beis b'chutz connected to your futza meinesecha chutzah. So the connections are many, and it all comes to teach us the lesson that Chanukah's power, as the Ramban writes in the beginning of Parsha B'Halescha. So he says the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, ultimately, yes, it was renewed, Chanukah, and rededicated. But then ultimately came this destruction of the second temple. So those lights and those flames that was once a ner tamid, an eternal flame, every day and every night was burned all the time, the Beis HaMikdash, was extinguished, God forbid. But Neres Halolu, the Neres Halolu of Chanukah, Ein B'Tein Le'elam. They never were eliminated because they continued to burn every Chanukah. We continue to commemorate, continue to do the mitzvah of Chanukah, which also shows that even in Golus, when the Beis HaMikdash is not here, it's not standing, with these flames have the power to illuminate the darkness, which is so much part of what Chassidus is about, to help illuminate even the darkest crevices of our psyche, the darkest elements of life in general, collectively and individually. Meinesecha chutza, meinesecha being the mayon, which is the wellspring, like the shemen, the pure olive oil, but it should be brought to chutza, the two extremes, coming from the purest, deepest part of the soul and of the on a cosmic level from the divine, the inner dimension of shemen, and revealing it all the way out to chutza, Pesach Beisim B'Chutz, to illuminate every corner of this world, including applying Chassidus to every challenge of ours. So whatever challenge we're facing, whether it's a challenge that we're proud of or a challenge that we're ashamed of, even the darkest parts of our personality, the things that nobody knows, that only you and I know, your own personal, deepest secrets, those ghosts and those demons inside of us, that's the whole point of Chanukah, to illuminate even that. So applying Chassidus in every given situation, that there's nothing outside of Chassidus' capacity to give us direction and guidance in our lives. It's a tremendous lesson in life, because it means that even when we go through things that sometimes we'd rather not have gone through, or we have such challenges that everyone knows in their own heart and soul, the challenge, we know we have Magdim Refuah L'Maka, we know we have also an antidote that precedes. We have Chassidus that comes to help us deal with that. And if those that ask the questions, Chassidus a medicine, is Torah a medicine? Obviously not. It's Chachmosur D'Tzeina Shel HaKodesh Baruch Hu. Especially Primis HaTorah is a Primis Atzmus of Atik Yemen, Primis HaKeser. And yet, as the Rebbe explains in chapter 18 of Yonah Shel Teres Chassidus, Kuntis and Yonah Shel Teres Chassidus, just like it says about in the Gemara about Teira, that Barasili Yetzer Hara, Barasili Teira Tavlin. Tavlin, Teira is a spice to just deal with the Yetzer Hara. Teira is Chachmas, Ritzeinu Shel Baruch Hu. Shashim Lefonav, meaning God's delights, inner delights. Shashu Al Melu Batzmuse. Completely, only God and Teira, nothing else is there. And Dovid HaMelech was punished for even calling Teira Zmiris. Zmiris Hayalichu Kecha. Zmiris Karisalahu. You're calling it a song. Like, in other words, a pleasure for you. And what's wrong with calling the Teira a song? But as Chassidus explains in Iggeret HaKodesh and Kuntus Sachen, and elaborates in Ayin Beis and other places, in Derech Mitzvah, Masa and Bekosef, the problem was, he was talking about what it's for him, and that is somewhat, very subtly, moving it away from its purest form. It's somewhat of an insult to Teira, because Teira is Shashim Lefonos. How could you call Teira spice, the Rebbe asks? The answer is, that's not what the Teira's essence is. The power of the Teira's essence is so powerful that it can even be a spice for the Yetzer Hara. And where do you see the etzem of Teira? When you see it dealing with the Yetzer Hara issues, challenges that you and I have on a daily basis. So not that Teira is that. The Teira can even do that, and when it does it, that reveals the Teira's power. That it's not just in heaven. It's not just for lofty moments. Not just in Yom Kippur or when you're in a mood and being in a spiritual state and when you're in the highest elevated state. Even in the darkest moments. Even in the darkest moments of Pesach, basically, mebachutz, even outside. And Kali and Rigli the Tarmadoi. Not just Tarmadoi, the Asis Meiredes, which means mutineers, defies God. But even Ragli Tarmadoi, the legs of which is the lowest part of the mutiny, even that has the power, tichla, from the word kaloyan, to eliminate and transform even those mutineering and rebellious forces of the darkest times in life, chutza. The chutz, pesach beis machutz, ma'nesecha chutza. So this is a lesson. Of course, Parsha Miketz is related to it as well, because Parsha Miketz, we also see the same story. Yosef, in the darkest of moments, in prison, compared to the Alter Rebbe being in prison, which is always in this time of the year, Parsha Vayeshev or Miketz, and he was completely, felt hopeless to the point where he was even criticized for the fact that he trusted, so to speak, the Sar HaMashkim, and shouldn't forget him before Parei. But nevertheless, in the darkest moments, from an Eved Nasa Melech, he became the mamish transformation. From the darkest, he became the greatest. The viceroy to Egypt, due to his interpretation of Parei's dreams, and as a result becomes the viceroy, which due to him saves Yaakov and his children, as he would say in next week's Parsha, that he was sent to Mitzrayim, even though initially, ostensibly, it seemed like it was a terrible thing, and it was, that the brothers sold him into slavery, first wanted to kill him, and he ends up in such a dark place, and yet, in the big scheme of things, the choreography, the divine choreography, we learn that actually that as Yosef said to his brothers, don't feel like you did something to me. Hashem did it. In order, the classic Hashem did it, like in the Iggeret HaKodesh, Simon Chafei, where he talks about not to get angry because of this reason, because of the fact that everything is from above. Even though a person will be punished for their bad choice, but and the person who had to suffer, that's how it was. And here he says, it came actually to become, I became a savior to you and to your family, and to our father and to our families, due to the fact that I was here and turned Egypt into a superpower due to the grain, and that was able to save the Eden, which later would lead to Golus Mitzrayim, but again was Oleh Naila in order for it to be another Aliyah, as they came out but a Chush Gadol with great treasure, leading to Matan Torah. And of course, Chassidus explains how all this is a preparation, Oleh Naila, the second Aliyah, to the Gula Hamitis Vashlema. So at the end of the day, even the darkest moments, as was seen in the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, that at the time was terrible situation. Same thing with the imprisonment of Yosef earlier. That all this leads to a greater revelation, and not only a greater, even a more intense revelation, like Dafka, by pressing the olive, you get a whole different dimension that can now illuminate even the darkest times, which is exactly what Yosef did in the Erves Haaretz, in the darkest place in the world. He was able to bring Torah and prepare the Eden to go into their dark exile for 210 years, and they would ultimately come out even greater and ready to receive the Torah, the Kur HaBarzel, which is what Mitzrayim is compared to, like the smelting of iron in order to harden them and harden their metal to be able to deal with any given challenge. And the more they were oppressed, the more they were oppressed, the more they thrived and flourished. So some lessons in our personal lives that each of us go through our moments where we may feel like we're in prison, or we may feel oppressed, and may feel dark. Remember to see it through. That's the key. The only way out is through, and through you become a far greater entity. And we are empowered now with the Chemin Shepard Data, with the Pnimius, the inner dimension, the oil of Teda, to deal with every given challenge. And then the challenge itself becomes an asset. The liability is transformed into an asset. As Chassidus explains in the Mishaal, give one of the Mishaal, and one of the examples given for this is that when you dam water, you build a dam and the water builds up, finally it breaks through the dam with so much intensity that could never have happened unless there was that resistance. To the extent not only does the water break through, but even the dam becomes part of the forward surge. So even the thing that held up, the resistance itself becomes a force that contributes to the forward thrust and to the power and the intensity of that rushing water that can never have happened without that resistance. So that prepares us, of course, for the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema, the ultimate Geula, because the Geula will be a Geula She'ein Acharei Golus, a permanent one, because all darkness will be transformed, so there's no more room for an opposite scenario. As the Rebbe gives the example from a Shtar Sheyatzo Lav Irur, used on Yutas Kislev, that it's a legal matter, even in the secular courts today. If you challenge a contract, and it's upheld in this court of appeals, you can't challenge it again. Now, in the secular court, you can appeal once, twice, but then it gets to the Supreme Court, ein acharav klum. You can't challenge it anymore. So, interestingly, the challenge itself becomes the power of the upholding the contract in a way that no one can ever challenge it. If it was never challenged, you still can challenge it. But since it's challenged and it's upheld, then it has that permanent feature. Once we went through darkness and these flames never were extinguished. We proved our way that we can make it through, maybe limping, wounded, bruised, but we're here, marching forward after thousands of years. That itself is a demonstration of an eternity that can never be challenged again. That's why the Geula will be ein acharei Golus, not just as a gift from above. In addition to that, it's also because there's nothing that can hold us back. It's like that which doesn't destroy, doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. So if any force is thrown at us, we can just turn it into an asset, which the Jewish people have shown collectively and individually. So this is tremendous lessons in our personal lives. It gives one hope, it gives one direction, it gives one the fortitude to forge ahead and know you can make it. There's nothing like knowing there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and not like the cynics that say the light is the oncoming train. The light at the end of the tunnel, as the Rebbe brings the custom, the Frierdiker Rebbe as well, would bring the custom in some armies, that before they even began the first battle, they sang a victory song, because it was a total, utter confidence you can win. Based on the Tanya, right in the beginning of chapter 26, where he says that when you're depressed and you feel weak, that alone weakens you in the battle, which of course, which means that when you have the positive attitude, the confidence itself is the greatest weapon of all. Because it means you can forge ahead. That is why it's so important to hold on to the promises. The Eden held on to the promises in Mitzrayim, that even though it was dark, they held on to the promise. And throughout the challenges of life and history, they always knew the promise, V'hi sha'am dalamnu, like we say in the Seder. V'hi is the promise, or the amunah, the faith in the promise, that held us, no matter what situation, that they can never annihilate us. But they never had the ability to achieve it, because we get stronger from the dark. And now we're at a point in life, as the Rebbe says, we're already at the end of the journey, because we've gone through everything already. Today we have the freedom, the prosperity. Now the challenge is not to be apathetic. That's the darkness of our times. And to allow the Shemin to shine through and lead us to the final threshold, lead us from the threshold, I should say, into the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. Well, that is a good segue to the next question, and that question is, are we doing enough to spread the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach? Now, I'll read the question in a moment. Before I do that, I just wanted to make some cross-references, and this is a good opportunity. I always do this every week, where to go to submit a question or a comment. So, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, And there you find places to submit questions, ask, and if you want a response directly to your email, you have to add it because the form is anonymous. You also find there archives of all previous episodes, and that's why I wanted to mention Chanukah we've discussed in episodes 47 and 48, as well as 93, episode 93, and episode 143. Miketz was the connection of Chanukah and Miketz, also in chapter 140, in episode 143. These, I said, can be accessed, and they all have timestamps. I want to mention this again and again. That means you don't have to listen to the whole hour. You can go in the YouTube. When you click on the video on our site, just click on the YouTube link. It'll take you to the original in YouTube, and there you have the great tool, which is called timestamps. Every subject covered leads you, has a link that goes straight to that minute, whether it's 20 minutes into the show, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and you can go straight to it and find what you're looking for. There you can also download for podcasts to listen it in your car, listen to these programs in your car or any other way you'd like as you exercise or as you are putting yourself to sleep. This may be a great tool to help you do that and have a very spiritual sleep through the night or whenever it is that you're sleeping. Okay, let's now go to the question, are we doing enough to spread the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach? Here too I cross-reference you to episodes 30, 112, and 153, where I discussed this. But here is how it was written now, and I think it's an important subject to address even more than once, and that's what we shall do. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I want to talk with you today about the Rebbe's campaign of Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach and a moment of silence. Pardon myself for the cough. Why is it that Shluchim Anash and the so-called leaders of Chabad and the Shluchim totally ignore the Rebbe's call regarding these campaigns? On occasion, I have the opportunity to watch the Rebbe's Farbrengen videos in 770, on Yom the Pagda, like 19th of Kislev, etc., where the Rebbe speaks a complete sikha on the topic of Sheva Mitzvos and a moment of silence. My understanding is that by the Farbrengens that were broadcast on cable TV, like 19th of Kislev, Yud Shvat, he writes Purim, but Purim was never broadcast, but you mean like Yud Beis Tammuz, and there were Chafov, and there were others, Vav Tishrei. The Rebbe would spend an entire sikha on these topics. It pains me every time I hear these sikhas because nobody does anything about it. I just want to quote two sikhas where the Rebbe talks about Sheva Mitzvos. Sikha 1 of the 12th of Tammuz, 5744, Tafshin Mem Daled. 1984. The Rebbe asked, how could it be explained that a cultured and educated people like Germany was able to stoop as low as to murder millions of people? The answer, the Rebbe says, lies in the fact that they believed in themselves and their own intellect, not in a higher being, in a creator. Sikha 2 of 19th of Kislev that same year, Tafshin Mem Daled, 5744, the Rebbe quotes the Rambam Laws of Kings 8:10, that just like God commanded Moshe by Sinai the 630 mitzvahs for the Jewish people, so too Moshe was commanded at the time to teach the nations of the world the 7 mitzvahs, and that the Jewish people are obligated to teach the world these 7 mitzvahs. The Rebbe goes on to ask an amazing question. Why is it that the Jewish people throughout the generations did not occupy themselves with this mitzvah? The Rebbe explains it as follows. When, unfortunately, Jews were placed in ghettos, where they had no contact with Gentiles and definitely no influence on them, or in other cases where it was risking one's life to talk to a Gentile in matters of religion. So in those circumstances, the Torah exempts the person from the mitzvah. Einus Rachmana Patra, or even Pekuach Nefesh, I would add. However, in our times, we live in freedom and have much more contact with the non-Jews around us. As a result, there's an obligation on every Jew to influence the nations of the world around them to fulfill the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. And that way the world will turn into a place of peace and tranquility. Just by looking what's going on in the world today, you see how the world is crying out and begging us to teach the 7 mitzvahs. I just want to finish this essay. Well, this essay, yes, turning into an essay somewhat, by saying that every chassid has the obligation to fulfill the Rebbe's wishes through using their talents, writing, speaking, monetarily. May Hashem grant us success, Mashiach. Now, I hope you could speak about this important topic, Hatzlacha Rabba. And then there's another related question, but I want to address this first before I get to the next question. Well, I read the letter exactly as it was written. To say that nobody's doing anything is a very extreme statement. I can't make such a statement. I think some people are definitely doing something, different efforts that I've heard of. Is it enough? Absolutely not. And definitely not everybody that they're doing. I mean, I would say the 10 years or more that the Rebbe spoke about this extensively was in Tafshin Mem, when I had the schus to actually start writing Fabrengens officially, through Tafshin Nun, or Nun Aleph, Nun Beis. But those 10, 12 years, there's 800 pages that the Rebbe spoke on these topics. And I think most of us are not even familiar with the amount of speaking, let alone having a real part of our lives, part of the plan that we have to do. And there's no question that Rebbe, a visionary ahead of his time, but maybe it's time to catch up. So I can't agree with you more that we have to put our heads together. This is not just the Rambam says it, the Rebbe spoke about it and spoke about the change of times. And frankly, this is the most immediate way how you reach the world with a message that prepares them for the Geula. Because remember what the Rambam says. What is the Geula? That the whole world will know God. The whole world will be filled with divine knowledge. And earlier he says, that all the nations will be transformed, speak the language of God. So what's better way to prepare the world, including, of course, the millions, billions of non-Jews, is through the laws and the moral code, the universal divine code that God gave us of tzedek and yesh, of morality and ethics. As Sheva Mitzvos, many people dismiss 7 little mitzvahs. No, if every Jew kept the 7 mitzvahs, we'd have Mashiach here already. It's basically the 10 commandments without Shabbos and Kibbutz Av. And then, of course, as the Rameh explains and others, the 7 breaks down into 36 and then to 90. So if you really break it down, it's a very elaborate system that if we followed it, is exactly a messianic world. And just like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya and Perek Lamed Zayin, Maseinu v'Avadesenu, that itself, our actions, that alone reveals godliness, and that is not just a cause for the Geula, but it is the taste of the Geula. It reveals the godliness which will be resulted in the Geula. The same thing you can say on that level regarding non-Jews and their behavior. What is Mashiach's world? A world of no famine, no war, no unhealthy jealousies, and no unhealthy competition and acrimony and so on. So you're dealing with, by creating a world like that. So there's no question, I don't think you need, the Rebbe said it enough, so I don't have enough words to say that this is a tremendously fulfilled directive from the Rambam, as the Rebbe cites, but from our Rebbe to telling us what we should be doing. So I'm not here to give excuses for anybody. I think everybody has to look at themselves. But since this platform is available, I'm using the platform to absolutely not just second, but to say that this is a prime directive and directly linked to what we're all looking for. People say, "What can I do?" Besides the Elil Medyan Gul Mashiach, besides the other things that Rebbe said. He spoke over 10 years, directive clearly. Every one of us have our sphere of influence, whether it's doctors or lawyers or other people we work with or people, co-workers. We live in a world where we're very much interacting with non-Jews all the time. Not just for business, the Rebbe says, use it for spreading the word of God, spreading the word of morality, as the Rambam paskins. Not just that they should do Sheva Mitzvos, but do it because Moshe said so at Sinai. And all the explanations in the Sichos and in the many places of what that means. Like you just said, like you quoted from Germany, not just a moral code, but it's because it's Teira Secha. Not just a morality, but it's Chukirit Senecha. Connecting the Anochi Hashem Alekecha, the divine element which gives every mitzvah and gives every idea that type of divine element that makes it unwavering and not subject to people's whims and changes and their own interests where they can make their own exceptions. And they do it in an absolute committed way. So I can go on and on. I could speak about this for the next hour, or 10 hours for that matter, because this is no question a prime directive. And again, I'm not giving any excuses. I am absolutely stating we're not doing enough. There's so much more that could be done and should be done. Each person can do individually, and others. As a matter of fact, I'll even present a challenge to all of us here. And that is, I will be happy to read any suggestions that anybody has in this regard, practical, that either you've done or could be doing. And let's turn it into a little contest, which right now, just this idea just came to me as I'm speaking, so I don't have it all formulated, but if you can submit ideas, I will use this platform and this forum to absolutely share them. Things that people, let's define it into one specific question, practical things that each one of us can do in regard to fulfilling this directive about Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach in our daily lives, at work, and other situations online, and so on. And that may be the great way to begin, by each of us weighing in. I'm sure if we put our heads together, we'll come up with ideas, and these ideas can be shared with each other, which will generate even more ideas. And it'll be my honor, not more than my honor, my obligation, to use this form of Chassidus applied to fulfilling this prime directive from the Rebbe. With that, let's go to the following question, which is a follow-up, which goes directly into some ways we can actually do so. Can Chassidus be taught to non-Jews? So here too I refer you to episode 122. There I talked about Torah for non-Jews, where clearly, based on Torah and Halacha and Gemara, that even though it says Akum Shalom Torah, etc., but it says a non-Jew learns Torah, he's like Kayin Gadol Shenichnas Lefnei Lefnim, the Gemara says. How do you reconcile the two? He's like a Kayin Gadol, a high priest that goes into the Kodesh Kadoshim. So Rashi right away, Bavarans, Sheva Mitzvos did who? Learning Torah about the mitzvahs that he is responsible for. So just like with mitzvahs, we learn mitzvahs, you need to know the background. What does the mitzvah entail? What's the reasoning behind it? The more you're informed about a mitzvah, the better you perform it. The same thing is with a non-Jew learning Torah. So then there's entire parts of Torah that connect to the Sheva Mitzvahs, which are fundamental issues. Many of them are what, as I said before, about the Ten Commandments. There may be distinctions of how a Jew does it, how a non-Jew is responsible. There may be differences, but fundamentally, there's much Torah behind these Sheva Mitzvahs. And I spoke about that at length in episode 122. So here's how this person phrased the question. Here we're talking specifically Chassidus to non-Jews. I know in Halacha there's some discussion as how and what parts of Torah are permissible to teach to Gentiles. I was wondering if there was certain teaching in Chassidus that can and should be taught to non-Jews. I know that the Bittle Rebbe gave over Bad Kodesh to be taught to non-Jews, and I have heard that Shari Yichud V'Amun and Tiny might possibly be something they should learn as well. I'm curious to hear any other suggestions or insights about this topic. Thank you very much. Okay, so let me first give you some sources, and then I'll talk a bit about it. Remember, when we talk Chassidus is Primus Ateret. Chassidus fundamentally talks about faith in God, love of God, awe of God, and what godliness is in our lives. When you teach a person about Chassidus, you're actually teaching them about their soul, about their mission in life, and about why we're here, and we're here to refine and transform this world. There's definitely distinctions between Jews and non-Jews, first in their role, and also in what they learn and what they study. But there's so much commonality. Commonality in the idea, when I just said these words, about teaching people about their soul, about their spirit, about their purpose, and living up to why God created them. The divine image in which every human being, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem, including non-Jews, was created. So there's no question learning Chassidus to teach someone about their Tzelem Elikim. For a non-Jew, he also has a Tzelem Elikim. So teaching that seems to be a simple logic. And especially because it's helping understand and appreciate what he or she could be doing to l'sheves yitzara, to settle and civilize the world and fulfill the purpose of their creation. But let's talk about some specific sources. So let me refer you first of all, Vayeshev Tovshin Memches. Vayeshev Tovshin Memches. It's a Mugadik Sikha printed in Sefer HaSichas Tovshin Memches, volume 1, page 159. Where he talks about this, and he actually brings that the Frierdiker Rebbe said that his uncle, the youngest son of the Rebbe Nishma, was called Rabbi Menachem Mendel, translated things from Chassidus in Russian in order to influence some of the dignitaries in Russia at the time. The Rebbe says it's true, it was a one-time thing, and we don't know the details of the circumstances. It doesn't say that it was an ongoing pattern, but he brings that. In another Sikha, Kiseitse of the same year, Tovshin Memches, and that what I just read was page 159 in volume 1. Here this is volume 2, page 629. And here he talks clearly about translating Chassidus in the language of nations of the world, not just for Jews to learn it, but also non-Jews. Shivim Loshen. Because as I said before from Hilchos Malachim, not only to do mitzvahs, the Sheva Mitzvahs, but to know that it came from Sinai. That means you're essentially telling them that the Torah says so. from Sinai. So that itself is a lesson. So here he brings about those translations. And in the footnote he says that even the nations of the world can understand in their Seichel Chassidus according to their measure, as we see practically in our generation. And it says Elohoyer that it's still in that Medina, meaning in the former Soviet Union, the Frierdiker Rebbe directed to explain things from Chassidus to a non-Jewish professor, who asked and was interested in some of the deeper ideas. In Teirei, of course, he says, and this is brought on page 230 in volume 13 of the Likutei Sichos, the footnotes I always refer to when it comes to this topic, that the Teirei speaks about the Chacham G'delim even among the nations of the world that separated themselves and completely focused on philosophy and godly matters and divine matters. And of course, I mentioned about Lasid Love, Lo Yesu Kol Elam El Ladasas Hashem Bulvad. Molar is Deus Hashem, Kamayim Layam Mechasim. Some more sources, Hafotzus Meyonis to non-Jews, in the Sich Fabrengen of Yutas Kislev Tavshim Mem Gimel. That would be the equivalent 1982. Yud Aleph Nissen, there the Rebbe speaks about spreading Amunah to the non-Jews and connected to God we trust on the coins, on the currency, and so on. And Yud Beis Tamas Tavshin Mem Aleph, where the Rebbe actually explains the famous story of the Frierdiker Rebbe when one of the times he was imprisoned as a child. He was in a dark prison and he heard a noise that scared him, which was the sound of a little goat, a little sheep, a little lamb. And the Rebbe's learned the lesson. The lamb is like the Nefesh Habamis, the animal soul. The Rebbe is the Nefesh Elikis, and we have that. We shouldn't be afraid of the Nefesh Habamis. We could always overcome it, as I discussed a little earlier, hinted to. The Rebbe said, but what's the lesson for all people? Non-Jews as well. It was a televised Fabrengen. And the Rebbe said, because everybody has what it says in Kehelis, Aruach ha'adam el lamayla, the spirit of man that goes upward, like a divine dimension, and Ruach ha'ba'em yiredes lamata, the animal spirit that goes downward. And you could be afraid. So the Rebbe took the lesson, basically Tanya's two nefashos, even though it's clear Nefesh Hashem is b'Yisrael, and uses me'ein zeh to all people. And in many sichos the Rebbe spoke how Chassidus can be explained, the ideas, the Ruchnius can be explained even to non-Jews, each on their own level. So the idea of teaching Chassidus is absolutely, Molar is Deus Hashem. What means Deus Hashem? It's not learning Hilchos Shabbos. It's learning the divine wisdom. Deus Hashem. Understanding God, understanding God's way of creating the world. Tzimtzum, Eir, Seder Shtalshlus. Again, measured like in any audience, even a Jewish audience, you have to measure and tailor it to each particular recipient. So that's the answer, and that is right there the first suggestion of how you can engage non-Jews with Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach by teaching them the spirituality that Yiddishkeit teaches, and of course the expectation that leads to, which is to live by it and follow this divine ethical Noahide code. Okay, next subject, completely unrelated, but again I invite you to give suggestions about the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, and I will use this platform to push it and make the buzz, make the right noise, and get anything we get done is better than not doing anything. And Yutas Kislev is actually a great time to connect it with, because the Rebbe speaks about the letter from the Alter Rebbe to the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever, his Mechutin, about Higdil v'Hifli, an interesting thing. Then the Rebbe used it many years in those years in the Mems. What does it mean? He writes to them about how the ministers and the ministers and the officers in the country in Tsarist Russia saw God's hand and they wondered. This Kislev is the Gilead Primus Atera, the vindication, as we spoke earlier, after the so-called the Gzeira Lamaila, that maybe it's not the time, maybe the Alter Rebbe was not doing right. The vindication, absolutely. What does it have to do with the nations of the world? And the Rebbe explains this idea that Primus Atera is meant to permeate and transform the world to bring it to the Geula. So there we have is a perfect timing to be able to, I must say, initiate, but at least revisit and reawaken and reignite the spirit that the Rebbe wanted of us in spreading these ideas to the world. Tzedek v'yesher, justice, which is, of course, what the Geula is all about for the entire world, a world of peace, a world of Mola Oretz Deus Hashem. Next question. Are there any directives regarding a younger sister getting married before her older sister? So the answer is yes. There's a number of places the Rebbe says that if the time has come and a younger sister is ready to get engaged, she should get permission from her older sister. We don't say it about a brother that much because very often, sisters that are younger get married before brothers simply because of the custom where women get married earlier in our circles. But when it comes to a girl, a younger sister to an older sister, to ask permission. But then there's also a letter from the Rebbe that I'd like to read, which is lesser known, to a professor in Tafshin Mem Gimel in Jerusalem. The Rebbe writes, I was pleased to receive your letter and many thanks for the good news of your daughter's engagement. To begin with a blessing, may God grant that it should truly be a binyan adayat, eternal edifice. In keeping with the saying that our sages that when Hashem shows kindness, He continues to show further kindness, may God grant that you will very soon be able to report similar good news about her sister. There's a custom in some circles, the Rebbe continues, which is also our custom, that in a case where a younger daughter becomes engaged to be married before an older sister, she should set aside some of her money towards the wedding expenses of her older sister, and that the parents should, for obvious reasons, do likewise. Hoping to hear further good news from you with esteem and blessing. So if anybody wants to receive this actual letter, the exact text, please in the forum that I mentioned, meaningfullife.com/mylife, send us a request with your email address, because I must have the email address to send it to you. Without that, it's anonymous, and we'll be happy to send it. So that's an interesting addition regarding that question. If anybody has any information more about directives regarding an older sister, the question at hand, please send it in, and I'll be happy to read it for the benefit of so many. That's directives regarding marrying there's an older sister, besides the permission, and now also putting aside some for the wedding expenses. Okay. Now let's do some follow-up. There's a lot of follow-up, which is why I decided not to do so many new topics, because I really want to catch up with the follow-up, but it just keeps coming in. So firstly, regarding graphology, which is a handwriting analysis of last week's episode. Someone pointed out that in addition to the Maimer that I mentioned from Tafresh Tzadik Daled, there's also a Sikha from the night of Chof Kislev, Tov Reish Pei Daled, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. That would be 1924 or 1923, that time of year. And that's in the Sefer HaSichos Tov Reish Pei Daled or Pei Ches. I don't remember. Anyway, the first Tov Reish Sichos of Frierdiker Rebbe, page 59. And he says it regarding the Ksav of the Rebbe Rashab, where there he asked at the Fabrengen to read out loud. He says, this is a letter that's very close to my heart. The letter written by the Rebbe Rashab on Yutes Kislev Tafresh Samach Beis. Well, it was written on Tazayin Kislev Tafresh Samach Beis. The Yutes Kislev, the famous letter, Zeh Hayem Tchilas Masecha, that connecting it to Rosh Hashanah. It's interesting, that's the year that the Rebbe was born. A little later, this is Kislev, so 4 months later the Rebbe would be born Yud Aleph Nisan Tafresh Samach Beis. I'm just pointing that out. So in talking about that letter, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, though we'll read it, it's worthwhile looking at the Ksav of the Rebbe Rashab itself, how he wrote it with his own handwriting, and we have that. And because from the Ksav you could see also the case of the writer. So again, very consistent to what we spoke about last week. Someone else wrote, I guess they maybe misunderstood what I said, or maybe I misspoke, that the translation of the Rebbe's response to Shazar about the analysis of the Alter Rebbe's handwriting, that the Rebbe was saying that that had I not known that the handwriting analyst who analyzed Alter Rebbe's writing didn't know anything about the writer before she analyzed it, and had I not trusted you as a trusted person, I wouldn't have believed it. I believe I said that, but just in case there was a misunderstanding, I'm just reiterating that. Okay. Ultrasound was another topic, which was the last 2 weeks, 2 episodes. So here's just additional letters that came in. I'm just going to read them as is, and without much comment, because I already discovered it quite extensively. Hi, Reb Simon. There's definitive research from a Dr. Mintz, son of Alvin R. Mintz, who was head of pediatrics in Morristown Memorial Hospital, who researched this issue in a big hospital in Philadelphia and did find hearing impairment in fetuses due to ultrasound, even from the Doppler, which is supposed to be a very low sonar. Unfortunately, I only heard this from the father, Olav Shalom, who told me about his son's research, never saw any articles or printed matter on the subject. I also as I'm also not tech savvy to be able to research this fact, I don't know the son's name or even which hospital. It would be interesting to find out more about this. Hatzlacha b'kol. Okay, so I'm just reading it. It may or may not be accurate, but we need to look into it because there are other definite studies that say it does not have effect. But maybe this is something that needs more research, and I didn't do the research. I can't come to anything definitive, but I would definitely advise before coming to anything, a decision, as I said last week, I repeat again, should be taken with great care. We know the Rebbe's responses. Talk to doctors, talk to Arav, Rabbonim, as the Rebbe's directives about this, to make sure the decisions that are made properly, both in doing it and not doing it, because there are circumstances where there's pekuach nefesh and other situations that illnesses perhaps can be prevented. So all this has to be weighed in together and make that decision. Another writer writes, hi Rabbi Jacobson, it is hard to believe that it's almost 4 years that I'm glued to my computer every Sunday for an hour plus. I just finished listening to your weekly program, number 191, 15th Kislev. 1. At approximately the 1 hour mark, you read a comment about technology and the Rebbe's approach. The writer questions if Chas v'Shalom, the Rebbe would change his mind with today's new findings in the medical research field. This person writes, how can a Chassid even think that? At Chassidim, we must believe that even 25 plus years ago, the Rebbe knew without a sliver of doubt about all future medical advancements. Number 2, about ultrasound in general, my sister-in-law, in fact, had an ultrasound done at 34 weeks. At that time, she found out that the child had Down syndrome. A shluchim of the Rebbe gave them 6 weeks to digest this information, do the proper research in order to be able to confront the questions and concerns with their community head on. Today, many years later, this 6 weeks head up became the greatest blessing for them. Today, if ever a person came into the Chabad Center depressed or in a worrisome mood, this child would sit down and make them smile and happy. Yes, true, this doesn't work for everyone. Okay, thank you for that. And next topic. This is back in episode 190, the Chassidus Question with the Iggeret 11, which I should also mention that I discussed in episode 143. I neglected to mention that back in episode 190. Don't get confused by all the numbers, it's just different cross-references to top times I spoke about this theme. Rabbi Jacobson, in last night's share you mentioned that this Laskil Chabina, which is section 11 of Iggeret HaKodesh, is written in Lashon Yachid, in the singular, because only Yechid's Gula can reach that level. However, in Lessons in Tanya, it gives the opposite logic, that it is written in Lashon Yachid to reinforce the notion that is attainable by every single individual. Is this a difference of opinion in how to interpret this? Thanks. So, if you read in Lessons in Tanya, which is actually what I did read before speaking about it, he begins and says, and this is the way most people understand it, that Laskil Chabina, why is it Lashon Yachid? Why not Lashon Am? Why isn't it for everybody? Because you could consider this to be a higher level than usual, than average, which would mean for Yechid's Gula. Then at the conclusion, he comes to say that's why it's written Lashon Yachid, that even this higher standard, the Alter Rebbe is saying everyone is capable of. So it has both elements. It is something that is unique and more an outstanding, a special type of expectation, more than the regular conventional demands in Chassidus, that even Gashmizdika things should not be seen as an end in itself. But this itself is what the Alter Rebbe is writing, or else it wouldn't be belonging tiny altogether if it's completely for the Yechid's Gula. So he's basically saying something that would be seen for Yechid's Gula is really for everyone. That clarifies what I really meant to say. Maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, so I'm clarifying it right now. Okay, next. This goes back to episodes number 189 and 185. In 185, you spoke about a Jew at heart and told the story of Rabbi Gordon with the heart disease. So here's what this writer is writing. I'm the one that got you in a little bit of trouble with a story joke from the father of Rabbi Gordon, of Olav Shalom. But the heart disease joke, okay. Of course, there was no intent to belittle anyone's heartfelt suffering on my part or on either Rabbi Gordon's, or on Rabbi Gordon's part. The real intent, I believe, of the joke can be found. The Alter Rabbi Gordon joke is better understood in Tanya Iggeret HaKodesh. I believe the last chapter where the Alter Rebbe uses the analogy of the circulation of blood. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's actually not in the last chapter. It's in Epistle 31 of Iggeret HaKodesh. Okay, this is really I'm just reading something to complement something that was discussed then. Guys, I guess qualifying his comments. So if you understand what I'm talking about, great. If not, listen to episode 185 and you'll understand where this is coming from. So, regarding what you discussed in episode 189 about Dovid HaMelech and Shimi, okay, that was the Iggeret HaKodesh that talks about Kas HaDovid HaMelech, even though Shimi cursed him, he overlooked it. We discussed that at length in 189. Please forgive any change. I believe the answer is found in the story of Dovid's predecessor, King Saul. Samuel tells him that he must be deposed because he didn't follow the orders of Hashem in the sacrifice and rather gave in to the popular demand. Let's call it that. In doing so, he gave up his dignity of his own soul and the dignity of the king of Israel. The Rebbe once had a person complain to him about a wrong that another person did to him. The Rebbe replied, that is the other person's problem that they did what they did, but it's your problem what they did, that they did it to you. By recognizing, like Joseph before him, that after the fact what happened was God's will, and we discussed this a bit earlier, and again, please forgive any of my mistakes in my writing. He dealt with the fact that he had to deal with the incident having happened to him. Unfortunately, life is not like school. In life, we get the test first and the lesson afterwards. In the case of King David, he came to peace with the incident and learned the lesson, but still had to restore the dignity. Okay, you're supporting what I said and explaining this idea. I thank you for the analogy with King Shaul. It may or may not work, I'm not sure, but I appreciate your comments. With the remaining time here, we have a little more follow-up. I'm going to do one about Shidduchim. This is a topic that comes up every few weeks. So this is following up episodes 186 and 189. I'm adding a few points. So someone wrote that here's another issue regarding this topic. I think there's simply not, let me just explain. We've been doing different issues regarding Shetchanus from time to time, and episode 186, 189, I dealt with some questions and issues. I'm doing with one more here now. Another issue is I think there are simply not enough Shatchanim in the market, and the ones that are in the market, I believe most of them work for selective groups of people. For example, for the rich, for the perfect, for their own families, for the well-connected, or the nisht. And then, of course, there are those that simply feel that the Shatchanim are incompetent. Well, yes, that's what many people feel. So what are you suggesting? So he suggests, I think every member of a nash has the potential of being a shatchan. I'm not talking about being an official shatchan, rather if you know a boy and a girl. And basically encouraging anyone that is capable to think about that there are people out there that are dealing with challenges and not just wait for official shatchanim. If you know somebody to offer, that's what this fellow is suggesting. And think they could be a potential match, so you should simply pick up the phone and take the initiative. This is a perfect example of shlichus as it pertains to a nash, which someone brilliantly wrote to you on this topic, I believe in episode 171. To broaden this idea of a nash being shatchanim, a problem arises. If a member of a nash wants to be a shatchan, how will he have access to singles? I was thinking of the following idea, that someone should make a database, let's say online, with each single submitting their age and what they are looking for, and then take from each category, let's say 3 boys, and put them with a family for Friday night. From the same category, you take 3 girls and put them with the same family Shabbos by day. In this way, the hosting couples can get to know the boys and the girls and see if they can find a personality that can match. And this can continue with the same couple for a month or more, or if it doesn't work out, they could have different singles for Shabbos and they can be mixed around with different couples. I spent a lot of time writing this, so if it could help even one person, it was worth it. Okay, thank you for your suggestions. I believe databases have been created. I'm not sure to the extent, but let's throw this into the pot. As I said, I like to welcome people to make their suggestions. That's why I'm reading these comments. And obviously, this is an issue that we all have to feel responsible for, because at the end of the day, the foundation of Jewish life starts with the family, starts with marriage. And we have I don't want to call it an epidemic, but definitely a glut of many young men and women who are need shidduchim, and we have to all feel responsible in helping them achieve that. Okay. Okay. Now there's more to talk about, but I think we're running out of time. So I'm going to move over to the Chassidus question of the week, and then the essays. Okay. Here's the Chassidus question, my friends. Mind over matter. Hi, I have heard the human conscious mind is only 10%, and the other 90% is subconscious. When Chassidus says mind over heart, meaning moach shalit al lev, the mind controlling the heart, specifically Tanya chapter 12, is it referring to subconscious mind as well? If yes, how do you relate to the subconscious mind and control it? Excellent question. I've never seen it specifically asked, but it's a very good question. Because you can argue that when the Alter Rebbe says moach shalit al lev, what is he talking about? He's saying in Perek Tes and Tanya, he says the nefesh halakis shesheda resides in the mind, in the reflective mind. The nefesh habamis resides in the left ventricle of the heart, the impulsive heart. And just like blood runs to the mind, the impulsive heart can affect the mind, but what we need to have is moach shalit al lev, that the reflective mind should control the impulsive heart, and that's natural. B'tevet toldasi, as he says in chapter 12 in Tanya, that we can control like Yisr Er Min HaCheshach, just like not light is naturally controls darkness, and a little light dispels darkness naturally, not like fire and water where they're two adversaries, but rather naturally, same thing, Chachma Min HaSichlis, that Chachma, wisdom, which comes moach in the mind, has natural power over the impulsive heart. The problem is, that should always be pointed out, that we don't allow the mind to express its reflective opinion, and we act on our impulse before we even let the mind speak. Which explains why in the next chapter in Tanya, Perek Yud Gimel Yudalet, it says the Eibishter stands on the right side and helps the nefesh halakis. So why is it that we give into the Yetzer Hara if it's 2 against 1? Because you have to let your nefesh halakis speak. It can't be a kangaroo court or a communist court where you only have a prosecutor. You hear the impulsive heart tell you its case, and then never allow the defense ever speak. You never hear what the mind has to say. And most of us would not make mistakes if we reflected on it a little longer and didn't just feed into whatever is tempting us. Even when we know that it could be wrong. Just reflecting would already prevent so many mistakes. Okay, so the question is this, what part of the mind is this? If it's the conscious mind, meaning you're actually thinking of something, the moach of the nefesh habamis is thinking about something that is a dover asur, a dover mutter, permitted or not permitted, but something that you shouldn't be doing. A taivas heter, for example, it's mutter, but it's taiva. So the mind, you use the mind, the nefesh halakis's power to stop yourself from doing it, refrain, or move your mind to something else, has chadas. But what about the unconscious? There's a whole subconscious dimension, I should say, of the nefesh habamis, which is there. Well, in Tanya, it clearly says the subconscious is not up to us. It's the control over the machshava dibur maisa that matters, which means the conscious mind as it's manifests either in thought, speech, or action. The subconscious does not manifest in thought, speech, and action. It remains dormant. It could manifest if you allow the subconscious of the animal soul speak to your conscious animal soul, the conscious part of the animal soul's mind, and that in turn controls the irktana, the 3 levushim, thought, speech, and action, or one of the 3, or 2 of the 3, or all 3 in that person's life. So no one's talking about trying to suppress the subconscious, because we know the nefesh habamis, that's what makes a beni a beni. He did not transform his faculties. The question is whether the faculties will also become conscious and manifest in the 3 garments. So moach shalit al lev most likely is not talking about controlling the subconscious. Is it possible to control that? Well, im yara lov ruach mamarim, like he says in Tanya later, then God gives you that power by a tzaddik who is transformed, has either killed his Yetzer Hara or transformed it. Harge b'tainus, so he doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, either tzaddik v'tevle or tzaddik v'rale, tzaddik gomer, tzaddik sheni gomer. You can say maybe they control also, they for sure control also the subconscious. But for the rest of us, the subconscious does not necessarily have to be controlled. It will be there their entire lives, like he says, betokfe. It remains with its full intensity, except you don't let it manifest in as soon as you know it's manifesting in the conscious thought, which means the hirur, which is the hirur aver, which we can't control because it's from the subconscious. Then, but as soon as you're aware of it and you push it away, that's in our power. That's how I would answer this question. I would also add that obviously, if you work hard at it for a long time, you probably if you consciously keep the nefesh halakis in control and comes into your thought, speech, and action, slowly, perhaps you can also weaken the subconscious powers of the animal soul. But that needs further discussion or further research to see if that's accurate. If anybody has anything to add to this or any comments, feel free to please submit it again at meaningfullife.com/mylife. Okay. Now let's go to the essays. So we have 3 essays as we usually do each week. And these are essays. Number 1 essay is The Natural Tension in Marriage by J.J. Polter, age 20, Oak Park, Michigan. Very, I would say, personal and entertaining and amusing essay. In a good way, I'm saying that. Here's a proposition I'd like to suggest. The concept of marriage is like a liberal Democrat living together with a conservative Republican. Allow me to explain. There's a concept in Chassidus that Hashem attempted to first create the world, specifically through midas hachesed, kindness, overbearing kindness. When this didn't work, he tried creating a world specifically through midas hagvura, overbearing judgment, strictness. And then this didn't work. When this didn't work, he combined both chesed and gvura together, and the world stood. What does all this mean, and why is this necessary? Well, I'd like to believe that there is a direct correlation between today's political world, the world we currently live in, and this concept brought in Chassidus in many more than 200 years old. And he goes on to explain these 3 different approaches, chesed, gvura, and the synthesis in politics, and reflected in our personal lives, like I said, in marriage. Very interesting. Some ideas are, I would say, pushing it a little, but it's still a very interesting read, and I definitely encourage you to read it. This essay and all new essays are posted at meaningfullife.com/mylife, and as well as you can receive it in your inbox if you subscribe, free subscription to our email list. Next essay, The Meaning of Money by Ari Jacobs, age 16, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Ari writes, wealth is one of the most amazing things God created. You can do so much with a lot of money. You can help out as many poor people as you wish. Money is something most people wish to have. However, according to Chassidus, our lives should not revolve around money or any physical pleasures. Chassidus tells us that we were created for a certain purpose, which is to make this world a dwelling place for God. Having an obsession with wealth ultimately does not necessarily lead to success in life. So being wealthy could be an amazing thing and a bad thing that pulls us away from our belief of the purpose of creation. And goes on to discuss this very interesting story he tells with the Aptarov about how wealth is distributed by God. Speaks about the Purim, famous Purim, and the Rebbe asked people who wants to become rich. And quotes the Frierdiker Rebbe, different interesting anecdotes, which all go together for a nice essay as well. And finally, essay number 3, The Animalistic Soul and Dog Training by Avraham Zigman, age 68, Jerusalem, Israel. This one is a really entertaining essay. He literally uses dog training and the methods used to explain how to harness our animal soul. I found this to be very creative. It is well known that the dog, man's best friend, which he domesticated at the dawn of time, is an accurate reflection of its owner. The dog's mood is a projection of its masters. The dog's personality is also influenced by the personality of whoever holds its leash. Experts believe that the dog is never at fault, as its aggression or subservience, virtuousness, or cruelty are a direct result of its owner's behavior. And he goes on to explain why is it called the dog Kelev? Because it's all heart, Kulei Lev. And starts explaining the parallels of dog training and very interesting counterintuitive lessons that we learn in basically training and harnessing, controlling and harnessing our animal soul. Very good. And this is definitely worth reading. So with that, we've covered the essays. And with that, I'd like to conclude. Everyone should have a very freiliche, lichtige, illuminating Chanukah, one that illuminates both your hearts and souls to the deepest and deepest recesses of your chutzah within you, the chutzah in your home and family, meaning all issues, even the ones that are more the outskirts and the darker corners and crevices, as well as Pesach Beisim B'Chutz, reaching the all circles that we can reach, even the most outside ones, Riglid the Talmudoi, Shetishka Achama, B'Chutz, outside, as we discussed at length. Using the power of Yutas Kislev and this Chodesh HaGeula to celebrate Chanukah both in the fullest sense of the word, both in its, of course, practical way, teaching people and encouraging to light the menorah and do the other mitzvahs connected to Chanukah, but above all, also the ruchnistic, spiritual message of Chanukah, transforming the darkness of our lives, using Chassidus, using Chemin Shepard Data to illuminate and direct and guide us in all the issues we deal with, both in actualizing our greatest potential, as well as dealing with some of the challenges and the darker parts of our lives, all preparing the world for the time when we'll have Hanedas Alolo, any B'Tein Leilam, from these latest Alolo, we should go to with the natives that will be lit in the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, in the Meneda of the third temple, the permanent Beis Hamikdash, the Gula Hamitis Vashlema. Afreilich and Lichtik and Chanukah. Every Sunday we're here. MyLife Chassidus Applied. This has been episode 192. Every Sunday from 8 to 9 p.m. Thank you very much, and Afreilich and Chanukah.